Michael Pierce from WDMA. FenCan and WDMA have an agreement, memorandum of understanding. We've done a lot of work and collaborative activities over the last few years. We participate in their technical conference, June, I believe it is the end of June. And we like to have them come and work with us at our spring AGM. So I want to welcome Michael, again with WDMA, and he's going to talk about USMCA 2026, review the politics and the road ahead. With the USMCA joint review now in motion, North American trade policies are at an inflection point. Session's going to give a Washington-grounded analysis of U.S. negotiating priorities, political forces at play, what the review process means for the future of trilateral economic relations. So, Michael, welcome. Thank you very much. Should be on. Just double. Circle button. Just push it. Yeah. Hold it. There you go.
All right. Well, thank you all of you guys at FenCan for giving me the time here to have a chat with you today about the USMCA and what the road ahead looks like, why we're in this situation, and some of the background and context for the thinking of the U.S. delegation as we all enter into this review process that starts in July 1st. So, I really want to make sure that that we've been working with Adrian closely on this. We're very much, our industries are very closely tied, and countries for that matter. We both have decided at different points in our histories to offer renovations to the White House. So that having been said, I want to do a quick recap of where are we today. So what is the process since the end of NAFTA to where we are today, and what has changed? A lot has changed over the preceding 6 or so years since the USMCA came into effect, or CUSMA, as you guys call it here. So this is a brief overview of what the trade policies of the Trump administration look like. They have viewed tariffs as leverage. It is not a last resort. This is an opportunity that they see for us all to address grievances, to address trade imbalances or perceived slights. This is, I think, been made very clear to all of us over the last couple of years. I don't want to belabor this point, but it's become, as part of that, an opportunity to address economic and national security issues. And this is where the USMCA is going to be, I think, that in that context is going to run into some roadblocks during the renegotiation or renegotiation process. Likewise, trade deficits in that similar vein to using tariffs as leverage, being able to say, look, we have a deficit of trade with you. We need to address this and either come to an even place, or the U.S. needs to be in some sort of surplus. And this is all in view, the administration's view of putting American manufacturing first. Now, I'm sure we can all come to some sort of understanding that there are contradictions in this, but ultimately this is their goal. When we're thinking about how they're engaging in trade policy, tariffs, you name it, it is in pursuit of expanding U.S. manufacturing capacity, expanding our production of raw materials, and this is where they see the country going over the next 10 years. There's a variety of national security considerations as a part of this, particularly with regards to China, and you will hear Jamieson Greer and others talk about great power conflict and competition, and this all feeds into that. This is the underlying part of that strategy. This is how you get to that national defense industry complex up and running, or to a more productive place as they see it. So this leads us nicely into the China factor. This is going to be the element that's going to keep us all, that is the, how would you put it, that keeps us, that could be a roadblock and a stumbling pattern for the upcoming renegotiation. Jamieson Greer was recently talking and speaking in Mexico and made it very clear that rules of origin are going to become the priority for them going forward when they enter into these talks. Now, I think it's fair to go through this relationship with both as Washington sees it, with how China has expanded the relationships with both Canada and Mexico over the last 10 or so years, to be able to better illustrate where they're coming from and how to better understand their thought processes when it comes to their decision making and where you can predict that these negotiations will go. Now, Mexico has seen we've got it up here, a 267% increase in Chinese foreign direct investment over the last several years. This is absolutely enormous. The expansion of Chinese, and this expansion is purely based on that 100% plus. I believe it's somewhere in the range of 150% effective U.S. tariff on Chinese imports. So by investing in infrastructure in Mexico, they are able to bypass a lot of those and get duty-free treatment on their products entering the United States. So this is a problem that is going to be that the United States government wants to address. They see this as a national security risk and a potential and a damaging factor to their efforts to expand U.S. manufacturing going forward over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And Canada has seen, not to the same level, but certainly has seen an increase in Chinese investment in that relationship. Over the last year, it's been about 4.5%. This is, while not on the same level, is certainly a concern to the administration and something that they want to address. That they want to make sure isn't necessarily stopped, but is certainly curtailed. Now, as in that same vein of strategic thinking and putting all of trade in a national security mindset, steel and aluminum are very much a part of this. Canada supplies 60% of all the United States aluminum imports, 23% of our steel imports. We do not have a like production capacity. We don't have the ability to extrude at the same level as Canada, but this is something that they see as necessary to domesticating because of that national security lens that they are viewing everything in the trade world from. And again, going back to the rules of origin, Canadian imports of Chinese steel and aluminum are a significant threat to that expanding production in the United States. We're often, we in the United States are very concerned about this, in part because it raises the cost of our products. It is a regulatory nightmare to be able to keep up with all of these changing standards. But this is the thing that they're trying to go through. But it was encouraging, and I believe the administration has mentioned this, that Canadian imports of Chinese steel and aluminum decreasing by around 32% in 2025. This is something that they're encouraged by. So there's been, and it puts us in the right state of mind, in the right place when we're going into these negotiations, where we're seeing progress on one or all sides towards that ultimate goal of making a more integrated, secure North American free trade economy. Now, oh wow, we got one of my squares went on a wander. So what do these tariffs mean for the U.S. housing market? So this is going to get into a little bit more of the political context, because all of these things are increasing costs to the American consumer at the end of the day, whether it's for apples or dairy products, softwood lumber, but most importantly, it's going to impact the housing market for us. The added cost of a new starter home from these tariffs, NHB put out some estimates last year, it's around $17,500. Now, for every $1,000 that house increases in input costs, it pushes out about 160,000 home buyers in the United States. Now, the political problem here that the administration is running into when it comes to this is that in the middle of an affordability and a cost of living crisis and the lack of home building that we're seeing in the United States to meet the 4 million plus shortage of units, is people are becoming pretty unhappy. And the polling will bear me on that. Now, I think the leverage that Canada has here is there's a wealth of products, raw materials, suppliers that are willing to meet that demand and can meet that demand if barriers come down and are made to be put in a reasonable place. You know, we just have some statistics here. About 30% of all the softwood lumber used in home building comes from Canada. 60%, obviously 60% of our steel and aluminum is coming from Canada in some form or another. As we look towards a more multifamily condo style building footprint in the United States, these are going to be really important products that are going to help lower that cost of entry to new home buyers. So this USMCA is, while important for all of our businesses, is a vital political win to the administration, because they can address issues like the housing market, but they're also going to be able to claim wins on things like food, groceries, everything else. So there's strong motivation from the administration to actually get this right. And I think one of the telltale signs that you'll see is that nobody's really been talking about it on the news. It sort of stays quiet and under the radar, which to me, that's a fantastic sign. When we're not talking about it every day in a public setting, we don't have people tweeting about it or putting out truths on it. This is a good place for us to land. So as we go into this is sort of we're entering a nobody rock the boat phase, where we all want this win, every single side, and we got to figure out how to best get there without upsetting the apple cart, so to speak. Now, I think this illustrates the point of why they're looking for a win. The politics of tariffs are not good for the administration. Congressional support is there. There is growing opposition in my conversations with some of my friends on Capitol Hill. The first thing they're going to ask me is, are you here to talk about tariffs? What problem do you have with tariffs? And what do we need to talk to the administration about? And I'm usually taken back a little bit, because usually I was there to talk about housing affordability or plastic packaging. Unrelated topics, but it's the first thing they want to know about, because they're looking for some kind of leverage, some kind of talking point that they can bring to the administration that's going to help them make the case that these tariffs need to be either curtailed. Do we need exemptions? What does that look like? The average cost to the U.S. family is about $1,000 over the course of a year. Now, for many of us, that is annoying. For a lot of people, that's devastating. And you're seeing it reflected in the polling numbers. 64% of Americans, this is a poll that was done earlier this month, have said that they disapprove. Tariffs are bad. When you do a party breakdown, it gets a little bit more nuanced. 75% of Republicans are still approving, which for a Republican president's policy, you'd expect somewhere closer to 85%. So it's a declining area of support amongst Republicans. Independents, that number is, I think, is really what is worrying the Republican Party and, to a lesser extent, the administration. And the 5 or so Democrats that do approve of it, I've got questions for them. But this really sets the stage for what I think is going to be what I believe will be a motivated administration that is coming to the table with specific asks, wants, and needs that we're going to hopefully see translate into serious policy discussions when it comes to the USMCA review. And I think there's motivation. I believe that there's going to be some good quality conversations that are happening from what I've heard from folks at the USTR office and congressional Republicans. Hold on. Sorry, All right. So timelines and deadlines. What are we looking at here? How long is this going to last? Is it going to be quick? Is it going to be? Is it going to? Which, you know, God willing, but is it going to be long? What are we looking at? So this is just a brief timeline I put together of, from the start, 2017, NAFTA was renegotiated. October 2018, the text was agreed to. December 2019, the Protocol of Amendments was signed and it entered force on July 1st, 2020. We are now at that six-year run-in for the review process. Last September, they opened up the public comment period. We coordinated with Adrian and other folks here to make sure that there was some consensus around our comments. And then we are currently here in May 2026, and in July, mandatory joint review begins. Now, there's a couple of different outcomes that we're going to be looking at and paying attention to. One, everyone gets in a room and says, we love it. Let's extend it for the next 16 years before we go through another review process. I don't think that's going to happen. A partial renegotiation. I think this is probably more likely an outcome where there's going to be targeted amendments. This could take anywhere from 2 to 4 years. No deal is reached, and the agreement will expire in 2036. Those are kind of the three timelines that we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about this. I am looking at anticipating a slightly longer process, somewhere between 2 and 4 years. I doubt there's going to be a firm consensus by the end of July, August, but there is hope. But ultimately, I think the no deal outcome is, I think that is a remote possibility. All right. So what are the things that the U.S. side is really going to be dialing in on and trying to address in this next round of and what are those implications for us actually? But what are we going to be dialing in on? One, rules of origin, North American content thresholds, cuts and North American content thresholds, and hold on, I lost my place here. Let's talk about how Congress fits into this equation briefly. Congress obviously does not have a direct role in this. They have signed away most of their authority on trade, but there are going to be three key elements that the administration is going to be keeping in the back of their mind when they're coming to an agreement, because they probably don't want to be putting new text in front of Congress. Congress is boisterous. They have opinions, and can be slow to do just about anything. They're slow to tie their shoes in the morning. So there's a couple of areas where they're going to have to be really cognizant of what exactly is changing and how do we either avoid or bring in Congress to that equation. So one, rules of origin. Changes to that will require a customs law change and will require a law to be passed. Changes to the dairy TRQs, those tariff rate quotas, implementing legislation will be needed on both the Canadian and U.S. side, and any changes to the dispute resolution mechanism is going to be require some sort of congressional approval. Now, this is all the way of saying I think one of these three is likely to happen. Probably the rules of origin and the dispute resolution. Those are two areas where I believe the USTR has made clear that those are areas that they're really going to be focusing in on. Dairy is, along with softwood lumber, I would put in that category, an area where there's probably going to be maybe some progress made, but with softwood lumber, I'm sure everyone in this room who's been aware of that issue has been going on for, I think, 50 years, Adrian. I don't know. Yeah. And why stop having fun? So I'm not confident on that issue being resolved. But I think there's a brief quote here from that was given last year by Jameson Greer, the USTR representative, shortcomings of the USMCA are such that a rubber stamp of the agreement is not in the national interest. This tells me they're prepared to go to Congress with these changes. They're probably going to be doing some significant changes, making some significant changes to this agreement going forward, and something that is going to add time and uncertainty to our world. So before I get into this, I think there's a couple of things within those scenarios I just want to go quickly over, as just so we can. There's nothing that needs to be done now. It's a place where everyone is pretty stable, but particularly when it comes to rules of origin, that will probably require some sort of auditing of your supply chain to better understand exactly what those inputs are, if they are going to be changing some of those threshold requirements of what was actually manufactured in Canada, the United States, or Mexico, what those look like. And that could potentially be quite a burdensome process. So as you go through the next year or so, bear that in mind as you think about this, because it is something that could eventually become quite a bit of work going forward. So these are the top three that I put together for the administration. I'm not going to read all of this. I believe this slide deck will be made available, and I've covered a lot of it already. But the top priorities are going to be dairy and supply management, softwood lumber, rules of origin. Rules of origin being the number one there, because that's going to also cover a lot of the critical minerals work that they're going to be targeting, looking things like aluminum, steel, but also rare earth materials and others as we enter into this. And there's going to be looking at trying to open up mining in Ontario, other places. I know I've spoken to Doug Ford before about this, and he's pretty excited about getting involved in what he calls Fortress Ontario, I believe is his plan, where it's expanding mining capacity out there. So that's something that to be bared in mind as we go forward, particularly with when it comes to the rules of origin. But that would be the thing to keep an eye out for. And I can't really understress that enough, the importance there. All right, so here are the scenarios. Here are the outcomes that are likely to happen. And there's really three. A managed extension. This is sort of I think, one of the least likely scenarios, but everyone agrees to that 16-year targeted, 16-year extension with some targeted amendments. The United States gets stronger rules of origin. Everything is resolved. Softwood lumber duties reduced. Tariffs are rolled back to standard levels, and input costs gradually decrease. One opportunity. Protracted standoff. This one is where negotiations take a couple years. There's more substantial amendments. It may lead to a more long-standing, a bit more of a durable agreement, but is going to result in unpredictability. The longer this goes on, the more unpredictable the market is going to be. That's just the nature of the beast. As people start to worry and be concerned about where negotiations are headed, the longer this goes on, the more problems that will arise. There's an old saying in Washington that the longer it hangs out, the smaller it gets. And that's a phrase that refers to the way legislation will often get smaller the longer it sits unpassed. And people get ideas and they get shrinker, it's smaller. And that's really, I think, the worry here, is that the projected standoff goes on too long and becomes smaller and smaller, and the goals become less grand, and people are just excited to get out of the room and be done with it, and we accept something that doesn't quite work for anybody. So there will probably be a standoff, but we want it to be fast, speedy, and expeditious, so things are being done with relative speed, so we can get to a good outcome for everybody. Now, the major renegotiation, taking, I'd say 2 to 4 years here. This could take anywhere from 5 to 6 as well. Putting it right up to the deadline of when the when the agreement would sunset. This could be this could be a real bear for folks, where we don't see any action. The agreement becomes very narrow, and you're going to be working across, at that point, probably two administrations. So you're going to be getting two different perspectives that are going to be on the table, and differing priorities. So you could go through the next 2 years and have a complete shift in perspective. That's not an outcome, I think, that anyone particularly wants, because it's just going to add length to the process, as a new administration becomes familiar with the issues and starts to build out what they want. What are their priorities? What are the issues that we see as important? But for business, getting to that end stage, I think is vitally important, and that's where I think that standoff of a year to two is where we'll ultimately will land, somewhere in there, because this administration is going to want the win on affordability, on trade, on their trade policy, but also they're going to want to make sure that this is a legacy product for the president. So making sure that is firmly in his camp and not falling into somebody else's. So before I go into questions, I just want to ask, just sort of take a poll of the room. Where do you think in any of these three scenarios, A, B, or C, where do you think we end up landing? Because I live in Washington, I live and breathe it. It's a bit of a circular bubble, but I'd be curious to know what this room thinks. So can everyone go ahead? C? Anyone for A? We're going to get this done in 5 minutes and it's going to be great. I love the optimism. Anyone for B? All right. Nice. I was persuasive. And then anyone else for C? I know we already got there. All right. We got some folks. So yeah, I think it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. But we'll hopefully get through this, and we'll have a new agreement in place very soon. But any questions, concerns, harangues?
So we talked about lumber. I remember a while back we had a huge lawsuit because we were essentially the duties were increased on our lumber at one point, and that was deemed invalid because essentially there was a de minimis clause, because they were saying that we're subsidizing the industry when it turns out it was just a very small amount. Took 4 years in court, huge payout that came up to us afterwards for the businesses. Didn't really affect the people who ended up working in those different sawmills and whatnot, but for the lumber industry. But at least the businesses got reimbursed for the opportunity costs and everything that affected them. Now with IEEPA, that's been dismissed, and lawsuits are happening already with American businesses, large class action lawsuits, and they're actually pulling them together. What do you think is going to be happening from the Canada standpoint? Because right now, our government is already considering that reality because of the impacts to our businesses and our trade partners in the U.S.
Yeah. I think Adrian might be able to answer the question from the Canadian side. I can speak from the U.S. side. I mean, we mentioned earlier, this has been an ongoing issue for 30 odd years. I think everyone's pretty eager to sort it out. I mean, the U.S. position is more of, we want to resolve as the soft lumber issue. I'll just speak to that. I don't know enough about the lawsuits and such, but I will speak. They're motivated to try and find a resolution to it, but not necessarily at the cost of loggers. There are loggers in that soft lumber industry, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, Maine, and some in Minnesota to a lesser extent, to resolve that. The issue is, they've been talking about it. I'm not going to litigate it here, but they've been talking about it for, the subsidies, no matter how small. They see it as unfair trade practices, and the lumber folks in the U.S. have been up in arms about it. I think the opportunity is that when we're talking about housing affordability, lowering that threshold and finding some sort of resolution will go a long way to getting more supply in the marketplace, is what I'll say there. So I think there's an open door, pardon the pun, to walk through there.
Yeah, so I'll speak briefly to the Canadian side before we do that. I know that there's the refund process for the IEPA right now, but that's kind of tangled up in all the lawsuits as well. That's complicated. So anybody that has gone through the process of like getting smacked by the EPA as you're sending products down, there is technically a process for that, but you could probably speak to what the outcome of that is at the moment. But maybe for then on the Canadian side, we have a relief fund that the federal government's putting together for tariffs. It's really directed towards steel and aluminum. Like they've got a little bit of the softwood lumber. They have some of the energy production type of offsets. Honestly, I'm still waiting on the CBSA to provide a bit more detail on implementation for that and how they see that, because usually it's going to be done through Carm Portal, CRA, refund, similar to kind of what we've seen through the OIC code stuff. So it's kind of my expectation is the federal government's going to continue down this path of like, how do I balance taking taxes from you guys and trying to give it back in the most obscure way possible? So yeah. But maybe the IAPA refund process, you could speak to that for a moment.
I've got nothing else to offer. Sorry.
Just wondering, in your discussions with the folks in Washington and everybody you talk to down there, what is the steelman argument that's coming out of them for trade with Canada being a national security risk of any kind in any vector? Like this is the justification, obviously, for the steel and aluminum stuff, and I think you mentioned it a couple of other times. Is there any substance? What are the arguments?
It's a really good question, actually, because I personally I struggle to see. I think I struggle with you on this one, but I think they do have. So when you think about it, so the way they're thinking about it is in terms of great power competition, and they're kind of. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but they believe that there is a probability of some sort of conflict with another peer adversary, we'd call it, right? I'm thinking China, I'm thinking Russia, peer adversary. They want to make sure that we have that industrial capacity where we can do everything ourselves, right? And that's where they're coming from, and that's how they come to the conclusion that we need to expand our capacity at the cost of all else, because we need to see that. Now, I'm not going to make any value judgments on that. I just wanted to hear. And that's the argument that I have heard from many of them. That's what underlines a lot of their industrial policy.
Thanks for the presentation. On one of the slides you had that Canada's imported 32% less steel from China.
Yeah.
When they look at those numbers, do they look at the fact that our economy is actually slowing down and that's why part of it has come down? Is that going to create or do they look at basically sheer numbers? Because that's my concern. You have A, B, or C, and I'm like, what's D? Because D is like, I just don't think there's any strong leadership or the capability for someone to come out strong to actually get a deal together. I think we have a bunch of leaders that are just want to do what they want to do, but no one that's really leading the charge. And my concern is that they look at numbers that are coming down, and then through the process of two to 4 years in one of your slides to get to agreement, our economy turns around all of a sudden. Steel imports are not down; they're actually increased. And does that just start the whole thing all over again?
I think they really are looking at some of those raw numbers. I think they are cognizant of the fact that some of this is a slower economy. I mean, ours has our growth was, I think there were some estimates put out by the economists that we lost about 1.5% of GDP growth as a consequence of a lot of this and other things, other adventures we've gotten ourselves into. But there's, I think they're really just looking at that raw number. They want to see that raw number go down. Now the economy's slowing. I think that that's something that they're aware of, and they're going to be keeping in the back of their minds. But they're really interested in that top line number because that's what they can put in a press release.
Nuance.
And that's it. It fits nicely into their narrative, right? Yeah.
Michael, thanks for coming and making this presentation. It's been valuable. We're always interested in hearing more about it. My comment here, and Mike talked about it, the numbers are sheer numbers, and I'd like to talk about it on a per capita basis.
Yeah.
I mean, we are a tenth of the population, but there's the soft costs as far as the tourism that goes per capita. There's way more Canadian nights spent in the U.S. than U.S. nights spent in Canada. There's way more Canadian homeownership in the U.S. per capita than there is U.S. homeownership in Canada. And I would say on the buyer per capita worldwide, Canada's got to be one of the biggest consumers of American product. So nobody seems to want to talk about that on a per capita basis type of thing. And so now we're waiting for the tourism industry, the Florida world, to sit back and say, hey, wait a minute, what just happened to all the Canadians that, have moved on?
Yeah.
And our border towns are really hurting. And we're hearing more about that type of thing, but it's certainly not making an impact in Washington. And I talked to the major renegotiation being a real problem, because if it gets to that, the Canadian supplier of mining, whatever it is that we're producing, we've moved on. Nobody's waiting around 6-7 years. The business owner needs to deal with next year's EBITDA. And so if there's infrastructure changes that need to be going on, we may open up a facility in the States, but chances are we're looking someplace else to sell our product, and we will. And we've got a lot of resources in the ground that a lot of people want. So I don't think we're gonna have a problem finding a customer. So I can't see the major renegotiation working in favor of Washington.
No, I think that's a point well made, and I think that is something that I know we're concerned about at WDMA, because for the very reason you say, you guys can go anywhere in the world, right? And if this is going to be a long protracted process, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you explore other markets? That makes perfect business sense. That I'm hopeful that they're going to be moving forward this. I know that I've worked with Adrian on some of these issues, and we've had discussions about it, about how do we work to try and make that point that you just made to both sides, that we need this to be a expeditious process, and it can't take 6 years, because we can't wait because we're going to need to plan our business strategy going forward. And if we don't have these agreements in place, or a agreement in place, you can't make business decisions in that environment. You don't know what your costs are going to be. And that makes life impossible for everybody. So, long way of saying, I believe they know this in Washington. And, I think it adds to that, that broader affordability discussion of, uncertainty breeds higher prices. And if we can solve for some of that, we can try and bring some of this inflation and high price growth under control. The other day I was looking at a couple of statistics, because that's just the kind of guy I am, around how quickly prices over the last 6 or 7 months have completely outstripped wage growth, and completely done away with wage growth, and completely done away with any gains that were gotten over the last 2 or 3 years. And, to your point, like, this is, if businesses can't hire, you have to make room and strategically think about potential costs over the next 3 years. That's going to influence your hiring decisions. That's going to influence, is somebody going to get, what does a raise look like if you are also having to prepare for a worst case scenario where there's no agreement, or a protracted, really long one. So I think there's motivation from that, all of these different sides. They understand the economy. they understand the position that they're in, and they know that they need to produce ultimately. I think I think there's an understanding at USTR that is necessary. But they do have their red lines, so we'll see how that shakes out.
Hey, Michael, thank you very much. Very interesting and very consequential presentation there. I got a couple of questions for you here. The first is, with any of these three scenarios, did you say they don't require congressional approval?
It depends upon what type of agreement they come to. If there are significant changes to, if there are significant enough changes, they will require congressional approval. So right now, the USMCA that passed the Senate, that was ratified, that is law. If there are significant changes to it beyond what was already in existence, and they do have some leeway to make adjustments, then there will need to be a law passed to address that. But it's only in specific circumstances. Like if you're going to read the rapid response mechanism for addressing trade disputes, something like that is going to need to be addressed. Rules of origin, that's going to require a change to U.S. law, so there's going to need to be congressional input there. So it's only in a few circumstances. It could happen in all three of these scenarios, or it could happen in none, frankly.
With that being said, will there be influence if the midterms in November go the way they're expected to go and turn against the Trump administration? And like you said in scenario C there, if it takes 2 to 4 years and Trump is out of office by then, what's the likelihood of the next administration continuing on the same road that he's sort of started it down?
So that's a great question. I worked in politics for a while, and I've gotten out of the betting or the prediction business. But given that there's a preponderance of evidence that there will probably be some sort of change in Washington over the next couple of months, you will see, and this is already happening in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of laws being introduced in Congress by predominantly Democrats. Some Republicans are sprinkled in there that would exempt specific industries or products from tariffs. There is one for home building. There's others for like food and groceries. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that start floating around. So I think you're going to see that type of legislation is going to be exponentially more popular amongst Democrats. So you're going to see a lot of that come out. You will see a lot more trade. You're going to see the Jameson Greer, the USTR representative, Howard Lutnick. You're going to see Scott Bessent. They're going to be dragged up to the Hill near weekly to offer reports, oversight. There's going to be a lot more investigations. There's a very strong possibility because of that oversight role. It sort of drags this process down to a halt. USTR it's a pretty small organization. It's about 200 people. Currently, they have 16 301 investigations that are ongoing that usually take between like 4 or 5. It's more like 3 years to complete. And they're going to try and get all of those done. They started them in January, and they're going to get them done by July 24th. So they've got a lot of work to do and not that many resources, and an increased oversight function from Congress is going to really grind that down to a halt. So that's what I'd say the biggest impact there is slowing down the administration's ability to implement a lot of this stuff. I don't know that they're going to actually be able to physically change anything, but I think they're going to slow the process down dramatically.
Sorry, just one more quick. For Canadians, negotiating with the Trump administration has been trying at best with the way they sort of go about doing business, like you said, with the tariffs at the start. What kind of influence can Canada and Mexico truly have in these negotiations? Are there any like silver bullets for us? Anything we can hold over Washington or the Trump administration to make sure that our needs are met as well? Or is it just, like you said, slowing down the process? Is that going to be our best bet?
I was speaking to, I had a good conversation the other day with Ontario's representative to the United States. Great guy. And we were talking about sort of that very question of, what do they see coming down the pipeline? How is Ontario engaging? How does he perceive the Canadian government engaging? I think we kind of outlined it over there. As long as we're couching this in an affordability for everybody, I think putting it in that context really creates the opportunity for everyone to get around the table and come to a positive outcome. In terms of like just raw leverage, I mean, it's unfortunately you're dealing with the United States, which is a pretty big economy. So there's, I'm not a, there are, right? Like you guys have, 60% of our aluminum comes from Canada. It's pretty inescapable. We don't have the raw material or the industrial or the plants available to meet that need, and it will take us at least 10 years to build. If every single facility that we needed to start to reach parity was being built today, it would still take 10 years for us to get there. And the one facility that was approved for building, I believe it's in Arizona, was built, they broke ground in August of 23, and they haven't done anything since. So, that dynamic is not going to change fast. So that's probably where, best leverage will be found.
This is a fun discussion. And I live in upstate New York where we had an aluminum plant burned down. And so if you're not familiar with what happened there, that was a mess. And and then they had another fire after that. So it's been a problem. On the issue of, what silver bullet might be there, I think something I think that gets overlooked a lot in this negotiation is a lot of this has nothing to do with trade and has to do with border security. And I think that Trump is using this to a certain extent, these negotiations as a hammer to extract some measure of improved border security, mostly from Mexico, but I think he also would like to see Canada step up on that. So I believe personally that if they can work something out on that front, I think we'll see a softening of that. Because if you poll people in the U.S., especially Republicans, and ask them what their issues are, most people will put immigration enforcement ahead of tariffs. Not by a lot, but by a little bit. So I think there's an opportunity to work on border security, even if it's window dressing to a certain extent, enforcing what we're already supposed to be doing or saying we're doing, put it that way. So I think that's something that we don't talk about when we talk about the economic policy, but it's part of the discussion for what it's worth.
I'm unclear about the dates that the agreement can remain in effect. You mentioned that if there's no agreement reached, it would expire by 2036. I'd heard before 2028, but maybe I was wrong. So what you're saying also is that if it does continue, then it would be in effect until 2042. So are you saying that essentially we're gaining 6 years if we get to an agreement? What exactly is the conditions in an expiry that we have upon our head?
It's a great question. When it was negotiated, they like to make things confusing in terms of numbers and timelines. And I did my level best with that one. But so the agreement was at 6 years, there's going to be there's going to be a review process. And if parties at that point want to make changes, then that will trigger a 6-year review or renegotiation, where it will go year on year. They're going to meet every year on July 1st. They can meet whenever, but that's the set timeline. And then by the end of that 6-year period, if there isn't an agreement in place, then the agreement will sunset at the end of unless someone gets together and figures it out, sunset at the end of at the end of the agreement, which is
2036.
2036. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's 10 years.
10 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if they come to an agreement, then that will extend it for it'll basically recreate that timeline, right? So if they agree to something this year, it'll be 6 years to the next review process, but the agreement lasts for 16.
Yeah. But renegotiation's complicated. Like there's a lot that goes into that
Yeah.
portion of the process. Like if we don't have an agreement.
Is there a possibility for another scenario other than A or B or C? Like if Trump really doesn't want CUSMA and Carney really doesn't want CUSMA, what happens then? Oh, by the way, and
There's-
our media refers to it as CUSMA, the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement. That's just a national character we have, is that we have an inflated sense of self-importance.
As you all should. It's no, I use the terminology I'm familiar with, as long as we're all speaking from the same songbook. No, I'm sorry. Can you just repeat your question real quick? Is there another scenario? So there's one other outcome, is that we come to the conclusion that nobody's happy, this isn't working, and then we do bilats amongst the three countries. I don't think anyone really wants that outcome. I'll be candid. I don't think that really works in anyone's favor. It adds a layer of complexity that nobody is fond of. The United States and Canada and Mexico lose an element of control as well over the whole thing. So that's the other outcome. I think that's quite an unlikely outcome.
Awesome. Well, Michael, I can't say thank you enough. I know we get to talk every other week and catch up, and I would say from kind of our perspective here on the Canadian side, there's hope because we can talk. Like, I know we've been doing, I've kind of steeped myself into tariffs and where our trade world is here in Canada and how we're interacting. And, this relationship between Canada and the US, I think, is really well represented in my mind on how we interact. Is that there's a lot of cooperation here. We're looking at this from the point of view, like, what does it look like for the US to be taken care of in this? And you oftentimes look at it from what does it look like for Canada to win in this?
Mhm.
But that is the way a good relationship should work. So
Yeah.
I can't say thank you enough for making that time to make sure we interact.
No, I think it's important to be able to. That's why I was really happy to come here, because I think it's important for everyone to understand where everyone is coming from. This is me doing my best job of trying to personate and talk about where the U.S. perspective is. But it creates that space where we can eventually come to some sort of agreement and understanding. So
Right.
thank you. I appreciate it.
Mike, thanks very much. We really appreciate your perspective, and it's great to hear from that side of the border. So thank you.